I'm Dr. Stewart. I'm a medical officer and a major in the Canadian Armed Forces. My current job is as National Medical Liaison Officer for the Canadian Cadets organization. My main function in doing that is that I provide advice on all things medical to the commander of the Cadets and Canadian Junior Rangers. I was asked to come talk to you guys today on the topic of stress. To be sure, it's a fairly big topic and it can be fairly complicated. So let's start off with a definition so we're all on the same page. Stress is one of those words that gets used a lot in our society, and it gets used to mean a lot of different things. When we use it in health circles and when we talk about it for the purposes of this video, what we're talking about is the human stress response mechanism. Stress response is a signal that is generated by your brain and released by your brain to signal to your brain and the rest of your body that there's something in your environment that needs immediate attention. And it needs immediate attention because it's potentially fatal or dangerous to your life and well-being. Stress is not always a bad thing. It can be, and it's important for us to keep tabs on it, but if we use it effectively, it can be our friend rather than the enemy. As an example, I'm out here right now on our helicopter pad, because I've just finished working at the hospital, and we just sent off a patient in a helicopter. The stress that came with that, and believe me, it doesn't matter how long you do this for, it's always stressful. But the stress that came with that allowed us to work quickly and effectively to save that patient's life, get them loaded on the helicopter so they can get out to get definitive care at a bigger center. That is the type of stress response that we're looking for and that we want to use effectively. And if we can use that effectively in other aspects of our life, it'll help us succeed. So, if stress isn't always a bad thing, how do we know when in fact it is a bad thing? Well, if you'll remember to one of my earlier points, we talked about the stress response mechanism. That's a tool that's really there to help your brain and your body perform at optimal levels to get through a challenging situation. Historically and typically, these challenges would be short-lived. In today's society, that's not always the case. Many of the challenges we face, many of the challenges you face, can be very long-lived. So when you're experiencing this type of stress for long periods of time, it can really start to wear you down. It starts to erode your capacity for resilience, and it really starts to begin to have negative effects on the way you interact with people in your life. And one of the tools that we need to start to work on early on is recognizing when we're in these stressful situations, identifying that there's a problem, and dealing with it early before it starts to cause the damage that we're looking at. So when we take the context of these types of stressors that we know have the potential to be dangerous, we want to watch out for signs and symptoms in people that we care about or in ourselves that might be displaying some deleterious effects with respect to our mental health or our physical health. So what kind of things would we look for? Well, one of the major patterns we talk about is just general changes in behavior. And that can be any aspect of a person's life. So let me give you some examples. One of the common ones that we talk about is sleep. So if someone is suddenly sleeping a lot more than they usually do, or not sleeping at all and keeping really irregular hours, that could be a sign that there's a problem there for sure. Someone who is kind of fatigued and disengaged, feeling down all the time, without really being able to identify or pinpointing a specific cause for it, could be exhibiting signs that they're overwhelmed with the stressors in their life. Medical conditions that are vague and hard to pinpoint and are very non-specific, as we would call them, things like recurrent and frequent headaches, abdominal pains that are very non-specific and just very generalized. Of course, these should be investigated by a professional, but oftentimes can be a sign that there's something more from a stress aspect of life that's going on, and it's something important to consider in the right circumstances. People who are constantly irritable, if that's not a normal behavior for them, people who are typically happy suddenly become irritable with everybody around them, are often exhibiting signs that there could be a problem. Changes in behavior with respect to dangerous activities, so things that we would consider negative health activities, so taking on smoking, taking on drinking, or starting to drink more, starting to consume other types of drugs, engaging in what we would consider dangerous sexual behaviors, are all things that could be signs and evidence that people are not coping well with the stressors in their life. Changes in eating behavior, someone who typically eats quite healthy and suddenly is all about junk food and eating at irregular times, generally is not a normal change in behavior that we would see in people who are coping well with their life. Other ones are things that would involve social withdrawal. So if we think about people who are typically very active and social, that like to go out with their friends, and suddenly are staying home, avoiding family and friends, and locking themselves up in their room all the time, it's usually not a good sign. So if you find yourself in one of those situations, or someone around you is in one of those situations, it's time to bring in the big guns, recruit somebody that you care about, talk to an adult or a leader or a healthcare professional that you trust, and engage them early on before these damages become permanent. So some of my colleagues from the Padre Corps are going to talk to you about some tools that you can use to help yourself manage your stressors in your life a little bit better, and how to cope with the stresses of life that we inevitably have to deal with. So I'll let them take over, and I'm going to go enjoy one of my activities that I like to do to relieve stress.